I don't have anything creative or wacky for this intro, so let's just get into the most important part, which is talking about the game. We start with this beautiful 8-bit inspired cutscene giving us the story to Specter Knight. The Enchantress has given him a task to recruit knights from the realm in order to form an invincible order, and with each knight obtained, the power of his locket grows in order to give him his humanity back. Then we are plopped into the first level, and tried and true, our first boss is Black Knight, with a mount. Him named Terrapin. Now he doesn't join us, but we get a bit of dialogue for him knowing who we are, Donovan, and that he has hope that Shield Knight is alive because he thought they were claimed by the tower. But away from the story for a second, why does Black Knight essentially know everything? He knew about the relationship between Plague and Mona, he knows more people than just Shovel Knight, and now he knows exactly who Specter Knight is, which leads me to assume he knows the other people. But he just gets fucked by everyone and doesn't accomplish anything. He just knows things and suggests a past we don't know about, but I have no clue if that'll ever be delved into. Moving on, Specter Knight sits atop a tower looking at his locket. Then the Enchantress appears to just insult and reiterate the goal. So now he goes to the lands of the different knights in order to talk them into joining the Enchantress, and if that doesn't work, well... yeah. Occasionally, after returning, we glimpse and play Specter Knight's past, seeing he had a connection with a man named Luan, and the whole reason he was ever at the tower was to get the amulet to protect Luan's child. One stage later, Reese, one of the wandering vagabonds, pops through the window, here to defeat evil and is essentially very naive. As Specter Knight tries to subtly protect him, the Enchantress imbues him with power and transforms him into a literal dark variant of himself. They spar, Specter Knight defeats him, and Reese is now keeper of the portal. After a trifling number of stages later, we get the rest of Specter Knight's past. After the two reach the amulet, Shield Knight is there to stop anyone from taking it and to destroy it. Luan says his intentions are pure, but Shield Knight exclaims the power of the amulet, which leads Luan to think cautiously. Donovan then fights for the amulet, not letting others tell him what he can or cannot do, and blinded by something else, he doesn't heed any of their words after the battle is over. He slices Luan into a pillar, effectively killing him, and the tower falls. After recruiting the second to last knight, we see what happened after the fall. Donovan lays dying on the floor, then the Enchantress appears. Being freshly awakened, she needs an army, and she can save him from death for the price of loyalty. And, well, an army. So he agrees, and she kills him with a scythe that he then uses. She bestows power onto his locket, then gives it to him to be able to restore his humanity, but only after 8 knights have joined her. Returning, we go to the portal, and Reese is not there. And then BAM! Here's Black Knight coming to stop Specter Knight! But the Enchantress shows up. Black Knight calls her Shield Knight and refuses to join her, knowing that Shield Knight could possibly still be in there. Specter Knight, however, wants to now kill her. Blaming her for everything he lost, he now goes after the Enchantress to end her. However, Black Knight stands in his way one last time. Defeating him, we rip Bozo Terrapin, and Black Knight goes to his rescue. Now, nothing stands between Specter and the Enchantress. Words are said, but Specter only wants to kill her for destroying everything, in his mind at least. After her first health bar, she calls upon Reese and fills him with even more darkness, becoming his ultimate self. Defeating him, Specter Knight tries to protect Reese, but the Enchantress is going to take Reese regardless. So instead, he offers himself as her last knight as his own final act, freeing Reese of darkness and her hold. The Enchantress mutters that Reese played his part well, as Reese sees that Specter Knight is Donovan. The Enchantress then laughs as Specter Knight carries Reese through the realm back to his uncle's home. The knights kneel, and Specter Knight takes up his post at the Lich Yard. And whilst looking at his locket, a familiar face appears. Giving some final words before heading out, Specter Knight then embraces what he is now bound to do. However, in the end, Specter Knight stores his locket as he recalls one last memory. But how much I said, you can probably tell how much I enjoy a story like this. Tragic, sacrifices, and a bit despondent. I enjoy it more than Shovel Knight and Plague Knights combined. Specter Knight's prequel is great in showing how the world became what it is in Shovel Knight. Seeing every knight before being recruited and what they've done, and seeing that the Enchantress used a dying man to build her army, and still in the end, he gave himself to her to save one he cared about. Good story. Moving on. From serious tone of voice back to a regular one, Specter Knight goes back to the basics of one jump then needing an enemy to obtain your second jump, but with the added bonus of some objects and projectiles that enemies shoot at you now as well. However, it's not the same as Shovel Knight's. Shovel Knight bounces on their head, while Specter Knight slashes through them to gain a height and speed boost only whilst in the air. But that's not all. He can also run up walls for a short period of time, then jump off of them to gain even more height. And thank God that they completely redesigned the levels to fit around this new way of traversing as the character. El cough, Plague Knight. So in this go around, Specter Knight has technically two attacks, his normal one then the slash attack that goes through an enemy when killing, or bounces off to be able to combo right back into them again. His reach is vastly longer than Shovel Knight's, which results in combos from moving to attacking quite efficiently. Making use of it all, he's quite a force to be reckoned with for his game's enemies. He kinda clobbers them with ease, especially if he's in the air to get the slash attack combos. And again, I really don't want to bash the game for it, but I really have never had trouble with the game except for some very specific movement parts. Because the enemies are again just sit and wait till they're open, if you even need to do that. All the mini-bosses have remained the same, but the other bosses we'll get into later. But still, enemies including the new ones that have been added are quite honestly still pushovers the majority of the time, except for Tombstone Dickhead here. It's a little disheartening that it isn't at least somewhat harder given that it is a second DLC sequel. The relics also don't help that either. They're really fun to use, but on the contrary, they again 3 for 3 take away challenge but add more options, I suppose. In both of the prior games /DLC /sequel prequel, there were challenging areas for a couple of the relics testing you a little. Here it is a very tiny tutorial and that's all you get. Then you can just use them whenever. However, with Specter Knight, it honestly just feels better and more effective to just not use the relics and only go with base Specter Knight. Before I get into obtaining them this time around, I want to preface how useless they can be. At the final boss, you're on a rail section, which, by the way, are few and far between, to the point where it barely even warrants a talking point. The section consists of getting close to him, hit him, repeat. Not even a few of the relics seem as efficient as just hitting him or even using the base rails as movement. Because would you rather have a clear shot at hitting him over and over again, or try to aim a boomerang that'll hit twice if upgraded, on top of the other thrown relics? The other relics you have are a transversing one, a time slowing one, and a healing one, and it just lowers the difficulty. And now to obtain them this time around, you just collect these red skulls throughout the stage, and give them to the Red Skull Man in your base of operations. He takes you to a skull underground where you go through a small tutorial for the relic. So instead of the stage being slightly built around relics, it's only built around Specter Knight's base movement, which is fine because Plague wasn't built around anything at all, he was just given shit. However, Shovel Knight had relics and his base movement in mind. Granted, the floating feather is used to easily get somewhere, but the propeller dagger had its downsides whilst the feather really doesn't. And Plague has no downsides except your own ability to not fuck up. Regardless, the relics will more often than not be an afterthought unless you fuck up movement or take too much damage and want to heal with the skull. So, relics, once again, can go suck one, and hopefully King Knight has a better balance between movement and relics because they haven't been all that great between them three so far. Now armor this time around is all different, -1, and thank God because once again, Plague was the same -1. The one being a charge slice that Spectre and Shovel share whilst Plague just has a charge. 2 of Specter Knight's armor affects the checkpoints, whilst breaking them one set lowers your will in darkness instead of instantly dying in pits, whilst the other set lowers your max health but you do more damage and regenerate darkness. One grinds on the ground, but since there's so much vertical movement, it's potentially just useless, yet I ran it the whole game thinking I could use it in some locations. Lastly, a Spectre form all for show, and his past self, which you get by obtaining all of the red skulls. That's all for the main part of Spectre's gameplay, and it doesn't really change per enemy, because it's hit them again if you bounced off of them. There are about 2 enemies that change that, the Knights and Tombstone Boy, which aren't all that different because they just take more hits and some have protection and can block your attacks. until you, well, wait, then hit them. But some people you actually have to wait for are the bosses, and honestly, they just feel easy. Every video I make where I want to talk about bosses will just get their own section, and here it's no different, mainly because they're easy. Like, I gave Plague Knight shit for being easy in general, but the bosses here are practically even easier. Granted, they did change them slightly, and from what I've noticed, there are about only 2 different attacks. But still, with how Specter Knight moves in the air slash attack, it's just easy, and not even to mention the wall running you can do as well. I'll use 3 main examples: King, Mole, and Propeller Knight, and I'll splash a little bit of small examples in between or with them. King has a card attack, which is slight foreshadowing and an arena change in no confetti. Other than that, nothing else has really changed. The cards are just a better confetti that go in the direction on that card towards you, whilst the arena is now pillars that fall based on King Knight's whims. That is the extent of the changes to him, which to be fair are a good amount to shake it up, but with Mole Knight, it's not enough. Mole Knight is the exact same fight, except he uses bouncy blocks instead of a variety of blocks, which is okay because that was the theme of the stage. However, nothing really has changed, and that kind of goes with Polar Knight, Plague Knight, and Treasure Knight. However, they made Treasure Knight even easier than before, which is baffling to me. Propeller Knight, on the other hand, has a different stage with the same attacks. Instead of a single platform with 2 cannonballs destroying 2 parts of the platform, the whole stage is now made up of his minions flying upward in a pattern, acting as your platforms. Which in all honesty is pretty cool, because it's a moving boss fight stage instead of a static fight like the other 2 had, which in turn inherently gives it a bit more depth. Now, 2 others have it, being Tinkerer and Polar Knight. Polar is a soft moving one, whilst Propeller Knight is a mid-moving one. But Tinkerer, on the other hand, is ooh. His fight starts just like the others. It's just him, he throws some stuff, then boom, tower. But this time, instead of him piloting the mech, he's in the top right running from you whilst the mech is chasing you, and the platforms are at differing heights, and or just not being there entirely, which in turn gives the fun twist with his different movement. Now before the final boss, there are 2 more, Phantom Striker and Reese. Phantom Striker is a lot harder than prior iterations and contains a bunch more attacks than last time, whilst Reese is completely different, and I want to say mainly his dark form giving him new variations of attacks and new attacks in general. I don't want to say much more because they're essentially new forms of old bosses and are fun to fight for your first time. The final boss, on the other hand, is piss easy, which is also kind of a theme with the 3 games so far. It starts with the Enchantress, which she moves diagonally, she makes flaming one-shot blocks, yada yada. The second part of the boss is where he's powered up, ginormous, and on a rail section, which you can just hug him and be fine. Just don't forget to dodge his flames, which is hitting space, or A, or X, or whatever the Nintendo button is, or you'll die. But in all honesty, his projectiles are piss easy to dodge as well, and you can just combo off on them. These bosses are somewhat pushovers. They have things that are somewhat worrying when they happen, but a majority of the time, the damage is just so minuscule that you get hit, and then you can just hit them again, over and over again. And most of my deaths to bosses, which was like 1, was to a stage hazard, and not to the boss itself, which is kind of a theme from all 3 of the games in general so far. Shovel Knight was platforming mistakes. Plague Knight was platforming mistakes. And Specter Knight is also platforming mistakes. I wish it was just a little harder, at least enemy-wise, and I hope King Knight is challenging in both regards. I haven't touched challenge mode, but from what I've read of it so far, it is just dodge all these anchors flying at you. So it's not really appealing, and New Game Plus is just the game from the beginning with all of your stuff. Bosses are easy, minimally changed to mediocrely changed, and not the main threat to the stages anymore. Specter Knight overall is fun and better than Plague Knight, but it still carries over the trivialization that happened with Plague Knight. Shovel Knight started out giving the next 2 a baseline to go with. Plague Knight made the game easier with his movement and attacks, whilst the world around him wasn't changed. That is all that I pretty much have to say about Specter Knight. It was a fun game, and a lot better than Plague Knight, but that'll do it for this video. If you watched this far, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it, and hey, another video within 2 weeks. New record. I hope to keep up the streak and obviously take a break around Christmas and New Year's. But yeah, if you watched this far, thank you so much for watching, and hope you stick around for the next one. Have a good one.